This week I began a sermon series at the Bridge, which is the church that I serve in. The series is called Fight, and the premise behind the entire series is that life sometimes feels like, let's be honest, that life is a fight, right? Life has a way of knocking you down. That the older I get, the more hits I seem to take. And the hits, they don't all come from the same direction, nor do I always see them coming. And even though I don't know where in my life that fight is going to take place next, and even though I don't know when that fight is going to take place, the one thing that I do know, the thing that I know about you and the thing that I know about me, is that we don't like it when our fights become public. We would rather deal with our fights, we would rather heal from our wounds in private. Well, throughout this series, we're focusing in on a man named Elisha. Now, Elisha is a prophet in the Old Testament. And in 2 Kings chapter 4, Elisha encounters a woman who is the wife of a deceased prophet. Her husband was a pastor, a preacher, a man of God. This is a woman who has spent the majority of her life caring for the needs of those around her. That alongside of her husband, she shared the message of hope, the message of God to the people around them. But now, her husband is gone, and she's alone. And not only is she alone, but we find out that she's overwhelmed with debt. So much so that when she encounters Elisha, she shares with her story with him, and she shares that she's being threatened by her creditors. Now, they're not coming for the car, they're not coming for the house, they're threatening to take her 2 sons and sell them into slavery to take care of her debt. So as a woman, she's alone, but you can also imagine as a mom, she's terrified, she's desperate. But my guess is that, like me and maybe like you, she's not about to go telling everyone that she's in debt, because that's private. But she does share it with Elisha, and my guess is that it's because he's a man of God. She perceives him to be from God, so maybe if she shares her story with him, maybe, just maybe, he can do something about her situation. So Elisha hears her story, and in her story he hears the dread in her words, and he sees the terror in her body language. But instead of resolving the situation, he issues a challenge to her. Now, many times when we go through difficult circumstances, we cry out to God in prayer and we desperately want Him to do a miracle. But we fail to see the role that we might have to play in that miracle. So Elisha challenges this woman, and the challenge, while it's profound, it's a little odd. And if you pay attention closely, you'll see that there's a subtle challenge within the challenge. That Elisha, in his compassion for this woman, wants to help her resolve the obvious issue she's dealing with. But in his wisdom, he wants to help her discover a principle that we often miss in the midst of our fight. So Elisha challenges this woman. He says, what I want you to do is I want you to take your 2 sons, the ones you love and are about to lose. I want you to take them and go out into the streets, and I want you to borrow as many empty jars as you possibly can. And when you get these jars, I want you to bring them home. And when you get home, I want you to close the door behind you and your sons. And I want you to take that olive oil that you have, because the scriptures tell us that all she had to her name was 1 small jar of olive oil. He says, I want you to take that jar of oil and I want you to pour it into all the empty jars that you and your sons were able to borrow. And that was the challenge. Did you see it? Did you see the challenge within the challenge? Here is Elisha obviously wanting to help this woman overcome the bondage of debt that she was enslaved in. It was an obvious need, and he obviously needed to deal with it. But he's also trying to help her break out of another type of bondage that my guess is she didn't even know she was in. It's the bondage of isolation. See, when the fight comes our way, when we go through difficult circumstances, when we face trials, the temptation, our natural tendency is to isolate ourselves, to internalize the struggle. Because again, we don't like our fights being public. And in this moment, Elisha is trying to help this woman see, look, what I want you to do is I want you to take your sons and involve them in the struggle. I don't want you to isolate the fight from them. I want you to involve them in the struggle. Now again, as a mom, she has the natural tendency that we all have, but as a mom, she also has this motherly instinct to protect her sons. In her mind, I'm guessing she's thinking she's shielding them and protecting them from worry and fear, that she doesn't want them to see her mother struggle. But Elisha says, no, I know you're trying to protect them, but I want you to involve them. I want you to bring them into the struggle. So I want you to take them with you into the streets, because they will see you fighting. because it's important for them to see you fighting. Because seeing you fight will help them one day fight their fight. I know you think you're shielding them, and I know you think you're protecting them, but in reality, you're crippling them. You're crippling them from developing the ability to learn how to fight, so that when that time comes, when their time comes to fight, they'll know how. And they'll only know that if you involve them in your fight. And not only are you crippling them from learning how to fight, you're also robbing them of the opportunity to see God at work in the midst of the struggle. So I want you to take your two boys, the ones that you love, and I want you to take them with you into the streets and involve them and invite them in to the struggle. And then imagine that moment when they arrive home and they have all these jars and they're going through this struggle together, and the oil begins to flow. It begins to flow into all the empty jars that they together were able to collect. A miracle is happening under their roof and right in front of their eyes. Imagine that. Imagine as they look in the eyes and into the faces of each other, seeing this happen, and the wonder and the awe that they can see in each other. Will they ever be the same? Imagine how much closer these three are than they ever could have been had she not invited them into the struggle. Now, you may not be a mom, you may not be a dad, maybe you don't have sons, or maybe you do. Maybe you're married, or maybe you're single. This miracle, this principle isn't just for those who are moms or those who have children, though it certainly applies. The point of Elisha's challenge here, the point for you and the point for me, regardless of what stage of life you're in, is in the midst of your fight, don't isolate yourself and don't internalize the struggle. It takes courage to become vulnerable, but there is power when you become vulnerable and share your struggle with those around you. That when you invite them into your story, power becomes present, and not only do you have the love and the guidance and the concern and the care of others, but they begin to see in the midst of your fight what one day they'll need to see in the midst of theirs. Now, I've had many fights in my life. I've had struggles, I've had trials, and when I share the things that I've been through with some people who weren't under the roof of my struggle, they feel for me. But when I reminisce about the past with those who went through the struggle with me, the people who prayed with me, the people who cried with me, the people who doubted with me, the people who questioned with me, the people who went through the struggle with me, they shared in the victory with me. Now, it's important for you to share your struggle. The tendency is to isolate yourself. The tendency is to internalize the struggle. But share your story with those that are close to you. Invite them to walk the streets of struggle with you. Invite them into your house of pain, so when that miracle moment happens in your life, when the oil flows in your life, it won't be a miracle that you celebrate alone.